Formula 1 driver ratings for the Canadian Grand Prix. Should Phil Grayson bring this back after every weekend? Well, maybe we will, maybe we won't. But let's start with Kick Sauber, and we're going to start with Guan Yu Zhou. I'm going to give him a 0 out of 10. Honestly, I thought it was, I think it's the fact he's in the worst car on the grid, and it made him look a bit worse than what he probably was. But it's a 0, man. Crashed that many times, was nowhere in quali, was nowhere in the race. It's got to be a 0 for me. Up next we've got Valtteri Bottas. He is driving a literal dustbin at the back, but here I thought he had a pretty decent weekend. I'll give him a 6 out of 10. Moving in to Williams, Logan Sargent, he had pace and he had promise, but these conditions, it shows he's got the minerals, and I mean, who doesn't? And this guy was just full of fucking mistakes, to be honest. And I'm going to give Logan Sargent I'm going to give him a 5 out of 10. I think it would be harsh to give him anything less, because he actually had good pace. Alexander Albon, I needed him to score points, and Carlos Sainz had a different idea. I'm going to give him a 6 out of 10. I thought he was running pretty good, but he was getting beat by Sargent most of the weekend. Up next we've got Haas. I'm just going to rate both drivers 6 out of 10. Well, no, I'm going to rate them both a 6 out of 10, right? Because I think they got shafted by their team. The fantastic Hulkenberg and Magnussen just flying through the field on the first couple of laps because the wets had an advantage, but their teams cost them. But their qualifying wasn't too good, right? I expect better for Hulkenberg, but I think they had good races, but then their team kind of shafted them. Like Magnussen, they called him in, but then they didn't have the tyres ready, and it cost them 6 seconds. And for his strategy to work, for the wets to be successful, you kind of had to, build that gap up and then pit. And for whatever reason, they didn't want to do that. So, yeah, unlucky for the Haas drivers, but 2 6s out of 10. That's for damn sure. Right, up next, we've got Ficarb. We'll go with Ficarb. Up next, we've got Daniel Ricciardo, qualified 5th. And then finished, P8 was it? I'll give Ricciardo a 7. I thought he had a really good qualifying. It's a shame. You do see that the midfield teams can get close in quali, but over a race distance, they're just not the same pace as the top teams, which is a shame. So I think a 7's fair. Up next, Yuki Tsunoda made that massive mistake and threw points away. I'll give him a 4 out of 10. Not good in the hood whatsoever, folks, is it at the end of the day? Absolutely not. Up next we've got Alpine, and I'm going to give Ocon, I'm going to give them both 7s out of 10s, right? The car's not that good, but in changeable conditions they both made it work. Now, yeah, did it flop a bit for Ocon? Don't understand why they said the switch positions, but here he's leaving, and that could get feisty. So 2 7s out of 10s for me. Up next, we've got both Aston Martins. Again, I think it's weird because Lance Stroll, you know what, it's good. He finished behind Alonso. They couldn't have done much more. I think Alonso did all he could, and I think Aston Martin shafted him. I do think that in the pit stops, because they got Hamilton through. Would Hamilton have beat Alonso once it turned to the dry? I do think so anyway. But Alonso and Stroll, they couldn't do much more. So I'm going to give them 2. It's much better for Aston. I'm going to give them 2 8s out of 10 because I just think that's where the Aston is. It's just behind the top 4 teams. So 2 8s out of 10s, and Stroll, very good for him. Up next, we've got McLaren, Oscar Piastri. I'm going to give a 7. It was a bit of a quiet race, wasn't it, for Oscar Piastri? He had a good race, but he ended up finishing 5th. And the McLarens were looking really good, but then he wasn't looking the better of them. I think a 7's fair. Lando Norris, I'm going to give an 8 to. Good pace all weekend, fantastic, but too good a pace for his own good, because it ended up with him getting built too much of a gap, and then therefore he was too far up the road for when the safety car came out. So again, you can't blame him for being too quick though at the end of the day. But I do think his pace towards the end of the race was a wee bit lacklustre. Up next we've got Ferrari. I'm just going to give them both. You know what? I'm going to give Leclerc a 4. I'm going to give Sainz a 3. And I think that's fair, because Leclerc had issues during the race and got fucked. What was Sainz's excuse during the race? Up next we got Mercedes. Again, I think they're the fastest car. I think they're the overall fastest car this weekend, and I think they both bottled it. Hamilton bottled qualifying, and then Russell just completely bottled the race. And I'm going to give Russell a 7, and I'm going to give Hamilton a 6. Qualifying, and by their own admission, they said Hamilton said he had one of the worst races he's ever had, and Russell said it was ugly, but it was still positive enough weekends, I guess. And then in the Red Bull, I'm going to give Sergio Perez a 0. This guy's just no good enough. For me, for Perez, it's got to be a 0, right? Because the Red Bull was nowhere near as bad as the Ferrari, and he had worse races than them both, and stuck it in the wall. You know, it is what it is. I think it's a 0. It's horrendous, man. Like, his teammate won the race. It wasn't the fastest car, but you've got to look at that. As for Verstappen, I'm going to give him a 9. He still won, didn't he?